Hi everyone, my name is Mark Levy. I'm head of our English Programmes team at the British Council here in Spain, although coming to you from Alpedrete. I hope you're all safe and well wherever you are. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our second webinar for teachers of early years, aimed primarily at the teachers in our Ministerio de Educación y Formación Profesional Bilingual Education Programme, and all of you who've come from other programmes and other teaching contexts as well. It's great to have you with us. For those of you who weren't with us last week, this is the second in a series of webinars exploring our approach to teaching literacy and English across early years, primary and secondary, with the sessions for primary and secondary teachers to follow. Our Early Years Bilingual Education Programme Working Group has been looking at how we can best support teachers teaching literacy, which is at the heart of our programme. Last week, we had a first look at our integrated approach in early years through topic webs, and today we'll be looking in more detail at the worked example that is part of our toolkit and at how we can create motivating learning opportunities from topic webs. Catherine Stewart, the head of early years from the British Council School, is with us again, and she'll join us later for questions and answers. Hi, Catherine.
Good afternoon, everybody.
And so that's also an opportunity to remind you that if you do have any questions, we will be having a question and answer section at the end. So please write them in the question box and they'll be passed by Maureen and Anne on to me to ask Catherine and Tracey later. So now I'm going to hand over to Tracey Chapelton. I think most of you know Tracey, teacher trainer, materials writer, and one of the people behind our extremely successful early years MOOC and Learning Time with Timmy, our young learners, early years teaching materials as well. So Tracey, over to you. Thanks very much.
Hi everyone, thanks Mark, and welcome back if you were here with us last week. Okay, so just exactly what Mark told you before, this is what we're going to be doing. We'll be looking at the learning opportunities that a topic web can provide for the different areas of learning, using a worked example to demonstrate how the topic webs can be used as a planning tool. So that's really important, that we're looking at actually how they can be used to get your ideas out there, okay? And by giving you concrete examples of that, so hopefully it will be useful for your planning. Okay, so just a quick recap on what we did last week. We looked at how children learn. We looked at planning based on the needs of the child versus the needs of the curriculum, which we'll be revisiting a bit today, and we'll also be revisiting how children learn as those issues arise. And then obviously we'll be expanding on how the topic webs can be used as a planning tool with concrete examples, okay, putting literacy at the heart of everything. Okay, so this is from last session, this slide. Reflection, and was one of the main takeaways, I think, from the session. Thinking about, are the activities that we provide meaningful? Are they adaptable, open-ended, and allow children some choice, being child-led, so that each child can reach their potential based on your observations and assessments? And do the activities and experiences we plan encourage curiosity, wonder, and invite further exploration? So just making sure we're all on the same page here, and how this type of reflection is going to lead us through the rest of the session, the rest of the training, how this is going to be what we have to keep present in our minds, okay? Right, so looking at child-led learning, here is another quote from one of my favourite early childhood experts, Tina Bruce. She says that play should take its educational place within the education system and should not be confined and constrained to existence only in out of education situations. So a bit like doing, well, it's playtime now, we've done all our work, now we're going off to play. We need to recognise that play is learning for young children and how to incorporate that into our practice. This is really important, I think. Children who are used to following an adult's lead all the time and can follow adult set tasks do not learn how to think for themselves, to be flexible thinkers with imagination, creativity, and problem solving skills. So this is the sort of typical case of if you as an adult have to kind of do all the work for the child, you're not actually allowing them to develop those skills, which I think is really, I mean, that's what we should be doing, is developing those skills. So we sometimes have to let go of the control, let the children make mistakes, learn from those mistakes. And usually in play-based activities where the situation is less controlled, this is when the children have the freedom to do that and the freedom to express themselves and be creative. So we're not taking the children's creativity away from them by showing them what we want them to do. We're letting them come up with the ideas and work with those. So this is, we'll be showing you sort of how to sort of deal with that related to the topic web later on. And what we need to ensure is that there is a balance between adult-led and child-led activities. So before we look at the ideas in the worked example, let's look at the benefits of adult-led and child-led learning opportunities, because there are benefits to both. It doesn't mean that as adults we just leave the children to it. We've got lots to offer, but what is that exactly? So these are just some of my favorites. I mean, this could go on forever, this, this part of the session. The adult can help the child move the learning forward, model language, thinking strategies and behaviour. They can offer experiences beyond what the child might naturally come up with. So that's basically, in a nutshell, the adult's role. And this is typically sort of, you know, when we go into a classroom and we teach, we show the children something, we lead the activity. But then there's also the other side of the coin, which is allowing the children to lead the activities. And that's where we looked at the previous slide about children having choice. And so, for example, our child-led activities are motivating to the child. They encourage language development. Something really interesting is that young children learn words that are meaningful to them. So it's sort of moving away from the idea that we've got a preconceived list of words that we need them to learn, and let them take the lead. You know, they might be really interested in playing around with the sh sound in splash and saying splash, 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 and you might be wanting them to sing a nursery rhyme, but they don't like the nursery rhyme. So it's about letting them kind of take the lead. And when we do sort of play-based activities where there's less control from the adult, this is when we really get that chance to see what things they like doing, what's meaningful to them. And that again comes back to in the previous session when we spoke to observation, where we can really get an idea of what they like doing. Children also learn language better when there is an emotional connection. So adults can get children excited about something, definitely, but children can also get themselves excited about something. And often, especially with, you know, very young learners who are perhaps only just starting school for the first time, they know how to learn, they're born to learn. And so as educators, it's our responsibility to continue that passion for learning and to help them develop that enthusiasm. And also, child-led activities provide opportunities for learning valuable skills, which we looked at in the previous slide, such as autonomy, critical and creative thinking, and problem solving. Okay, so just moving on from the child-led activities, I want to expand a bit on that, and we'll look at sort of continuous provision, what that means. And there's a little quote over to the side where it's from the statutory framework for the early years foundation stage in the latest publication by the Department for Education in England. And it says, play is essential for children's development, building their confidence as they learn to explore, relate to others, set their own goals and solve problems. So it's really at the heart of early years best practice. And we'll just talk you through some of the things that this means if you're not already doing it, which I think many of you probably are. But the continuous provision basically means open-ended, child-led and play-based, okay? And what does that look like? So, well, that's on my next slide. What does that look like? I've got a lovely picture for you, but for the moment, We'll look at focusing on literacy and why it's so important to play. How do children learn language? Well, this is an interesting quote from the Linguistic Society of America, which says that there is no one point at which a child learns to talk. By the time the child first utters a single meaningful word, he or she has already spent many months playing around with the sounds and intonations of language and connecting words with meaning. So that could be at home, it could be if they watch television, it could be through singing songs, nursery rhymes, it could be playing games, it could be listening to the teacher read a story, but without any objective other than just exposure to the language, and just that sort of playful approach to the language, and meaning like the child really is in control here. And then and also what this points out is that children learn language through play as well. It's not just about other skills, it's how they learn to communicate through play. It's their first experience of the world. And this is a really interesting sort of complement to what we've just said there. For example, interesting piece of information, if a child knows 8 nursery rhymes by the time they are 4 years old, they are often among the best readers in the class by the time they are 8. Okay. Anybody who works with young children knows that if the child is exposed to rich language, they may not always produce it at the time, but over time and later on, that input is really, really valuable. So don't despair, even if you don't see the results of all your good work in the early years, it will come out eventually. So that's why we also have to be careful with things like assessment, because we need to look at children's progress in a holistic sense, and also know that sometimes it takes time for that language exposure to sink in. Okay, so this is what we mean when we're looking at continuous provision. What does it look like? It's open-ended, it's accessible, it's child-led, so there's some choice there, and it's play-based, which means it's developmentally appropriate. Okay, so all of these different areas can cover your continuous provision. They can provide continuous provision. Okay, so we have, just looking at it, the graphic is all interconnected, so it's an integrated approach. Literacy and English are not taught in isolation. They're taught with, through other skills, other activities. It's basically continuous provision means providing opportunities set up in the classroom for the children to access when they wish, or it means that they can also go back to things. So it's about actually setting up the spaces, and that could, and also an inclusive approach. So it could mean sort of including working with whoever works in the room is coming into that room, and it's set up in a particular way to allow all of these things to happen, whether that be in English or in Spanish. So it could be, it's about sort of using the space, working together, a shared and integrated approach, because as we know, children don't learn in isolation. They learn many things at once. So they don't learn one thing and then they learn another thing. It's not a linear process. It's very interconnected. So these are just some of the areas that we need to consider when we're setting up continuous provision. Okay. Okay, so that's what that looks like. Now, we spoke last week about using stories to generate topics and content, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to look at a model using ideas from the worked example for the following areas of learning, and that will include all of those things that we just saw from continuous provision, as well as adult-led activities, okay? So we've chosen to look at the areas of communication and language literacy, understanding the world, and expressive arts and design, just to show you how to sort of develop the topic web and plan activities around the learning objectives, okay? So really, this is the focus of today's training session, to show you how that works. So this is the, we're using the monkey puzzle for segundo de infantil. And what we're going to do is we're going to start off with communication and language. Oh, sorry, that's the actual topic web. So this is what we looked at last week, just as a bit of a refresh. So you have, under all the different areas of learning, some learning objectives, okay? All right, so I'll just move on to the next slide. Here we go. So this is the communication and language, the learning area. And what we've done is we've put in the center here the objectives. So if you go back to the previous slide, you can see here, there's the objectives. So I've pulled some of those out, not all of them because they didn't fit on the slide, but just so that you can see. The learning objectives are in the center, and then around those are the activities that we could plan, okay? So these are just ideas of how to pull out the activities or how to plan the activities based on what your objectives are. So we've got there, as communicators, we'll predict what the story might be about, and we'll perform parts of the story. As readers, we will look at adjectives to describe the different animals and associate action verbs with the way the animals move in the story. And we'll look at speech marks and pronunciation. As writers, we'll attempt to write the animal names and make a class book. Okay, so these are examples of activities that meet these objectives. Okay, so making a story sack, retelling the story together using props. They're examples of how we will predict what the story might be about, and we'll perform parts of the story. Okay, and then here, playing guess the animal or using a puppet to teach children the body parts. That's an example of how we can look at adjectives to describe the different animals. Okay, and then down here we've got play a game of copy me or follow the leader or whatever the game is, where you walk, pounce, jump, run like a particular animal. And that's how that activity will show us how we can associate action verbs with the way the animals move. Okay, and then looking at speech marks and pronunciation. So this is a way that looking at speech marks and pronunciation, that sounds very grown up. We might be tempted to give out a worksheet with something like that. But this is a developmentally appropriate way of doing that. In orange down here, we perform parts of the story to an audience, and we look at the speech marks and link them to the parts of the story being performed. Okay, so that's just raising awareness. You're not testing the children on the speech marks and pronunciation, but you're raising awareness of their function in a very natural way. And as writers, we will attempt to write the animal names and make a class book. So we have over here, we've got the phonics and the creating another page for a book. Now, some of these activities, you might be thinking, oh, but they're art and craft, they're arts and design activities too, or that you could do these in understanding the world. And if you're thinking that, then you're right. Okay, there's lots of overlap because as we discussed earlier and as we discussed in last week's webinar, children learn many things at once, and so it's very difficult to separate what children are actually doing. I think it's about, as the adult, about spotting how they're meeting the learning activities, the learning objectives through the activities that we provide. Okay, all of these activities can be either adult-led or child-led. So, for example, you might, playing guess the animal. Once the children actually know how to play that, they could end up doing that in their free play time, or using puppets in their free play. Once they've made the puppets, they could be using the puppets to, act out a part of the story spontaneously. It doesn't mean that they have to do it when you say. I think the other thing as well, like the finger painting for the M or the S, that could be set up on a writing table. that children access when they feel inspired. So it's not necessarily about the teacher leading everything and everybody doing everything at the same time. And again, it's flexible. It can be developed according to the needs of your classes and the type of environment that you have and what's possible for you. But this is just showing the possibilities and sort of modeling sort of good practice. Okay, so that's communication and language. What I just mentioned before is they're interconnected within each other, but they're also connected to other areas of learning. And also it's an integrated approach through topic webs. This is a really efficient way of teaching a lot of different skills and content, but also reflects how the children learn. But as you'll see when we move through the slides, it doesn't mean that you have to do everything in one area. It's about showing how everything's interlinked, and actually, you know, by doing these activities here, you're achieving all of these objectives. Okay, so we'll move on to another area of learning to focus on, which is understanding the world. Okay, so our objectives in the centre are, as scientists, we will look at the creatures in the story. What do they eat? Where do they live? We'll match adult and baby animals and look at similarities and differences. We'll look at patterns and textures of animals and investigate what camouflage means. How have the animals adapted to their environment, and how can we protect the environment? I mean, this was difficult enough to color code because, as I mentioned, everything kind of crosses over. So it's not set in stone. It's just to give you an idea that, you know, through the types of activities we plan, we are meeting all of those objectives. Okay, so we've got animal puppets, again, to teach body parts. So, you know, focusing on the body parts, you're teaching literacy by naming the body parts, but you're also teaching understanding the world by focusing on the different body parts. Okay, and looking at the differences and similarities, which is what we've got here as well. We can use our collection of animals from the nature walk, because there's a nature walk down there in the orange part, to talk about the characteristics of the real animals in the jungle. We can also sort them by various characteristics: number of legs, body covering, how they move, wings or no wings, number of eyes, big and small, what they eat. So that's a categorizing, which is also mathematical as well. Looking at exploring nature, look at the different animals and insects in the story. Then you can go on a nature walk in your local park or in the playground, take photographs of the creatures that you find or you see. Did they see any animals in the story? Probably not a monkey, but there's definitely insects in the story. And discuss ways to care for the animals, how you found them on your walk and how to protect them. So that's looking at sort of protecting the environment, making sure that we respect the animals that live around us, and also respecting the jungles, so we can, you know, look at different habitats as well. And then the green one, we're looking at patterns and textures, investigating what camouflage means. Again, patterns and textures, that's also expressive art and design. So it's not set in stone. These are just sort of ideas of how you can make sure that you're, you know, checking off all of your objectives through lots of fun activities. So that's like looking at photographs of animals from the story as well as other animals, pointing to and naming the body parts, classifying the animals in different ways, looking at the patterns and textures, looking at habitats, rainforest versus domestic animals. And then you have similarities and differences between adult and baby animals, playing a matching game. And again, these are things that can be done as a whole class or in learning sort of areas that you've got set up around the room as part of your continuous provision or in small groups. So, you know, depending on your circumstances, the idea is that the planning tool is meant to be flexible to meet the needs of your students with the resources that you've got. Okay. Now, moving on to expressive arts and design, more sort of focus on the the objectives in the center. As artists, we'll look at pictures, we'll use different media to create our own animals and jungle scenes. Again, that's kind of a understanding the world objective as well. We'll use percussion instruments to recreate the sounds of the jungle. We'll develop and use story props to act out different characters from the story, and we will perform to different audiences. Okay, so you've got ideas there for the performance, for singing songs, performing parts of the story, looking at pictures here, looking at the front cover of the story, creating a classroom library book. Children write animal names under the pictures. They can paint pictures or draw a picture of one of the different people in their life who helps them, cut out all of the pictures and create a display of people who help us when we're worried. So we had a question, I think, last week about, if children don't have the level of language for some of these concepts, and a lot of this can be done through art and design, where we're just, drawing pictures about expressions and representing it in a visual way and then feeding in the language. So yeah, the using different media, children decorating masks with paint or stick on material of different patterns, colors and textures. Again, that's connected to our understanding the world objective as well, displaying leaves and lianas around the room and retelling the story together using props. So you can see how things kind of work together. Whilst you're identifying very specific learning objectives and very specific activities, you're also seeing how they all link together to create a truly integrated approach. Okay. So I'd like to think this is my favorite slide in the whole presentation. This is some work done by some 3-year-olds, which they did after reading Monkey Puzzle a couple of times. So 2 or 3 times they read the story. And just to explain a bit about the activity, they were given big pieces of paper and told they could draw whatever they like. So this is what they came up with. And now this is examples of child-led. It's adult initiated because the adult's giving the, the task to giving the paper and the resources. But there's no other instruction apart from drawing something drawing whatever you like. And from that we have got our art and design. We've got some literacy, our mark making, and you can see some early letter formation. I think some of the children were told that they could write any letters that they know. You've got a story response, so you've got your understanding of the story, the children's interpretation of certain events, so there's your sort of comprehension. You've also got physical development connected to literacy because we've got our fine motor skills, so that's looking at sort of handwriting development and spatial awareness as well, where to put the different things on the page. And of course, love of reading. And I think because you've sort of, the instruction was to draw whatever you like, what we can do here is we can look at all the things that the children have done, and we're celebrating whatever they've done. And actually, we probably get a lot more information by it being a much freer activity, a lot more information about their skills and abilities and how to sort of support them in their learning and development, rather than if this was a worksheet with a very specific adult sort of agenda. I think the work that children produce is so rich in information that it can give us, and all they had was blank paper and some felt tip pens. So yeah, I think I think that's why it's my favorite slide, because it says it all basically, and hopefully that can sort of show you some of the cool things that come out of once having read a story with the children, and all that inspires. Okay, so just this is to sort of show you what the actual worked example looks like. This slide here is just a recap of the different areas of learning and development in the topic web and then in the worked example. So you've got communication and language, literacy, personal, social and emotional development, physical development, and then so they're the prime areas of learning, and the specific areas are mathematics, understanding the world, expressive arts and design, and then you've got the spiritual, moral, social and cultural development. So they've all been color coded, and this is what it actually looks like. So the slides that I showed you before are sort of how to pull out some of the main features of the topic web and think of activities to go with those learning objectives. And this is how it's kind of been set out. Here's an example of the section on games, for example, which is always popular. You can see why we haven't broken the topic web up as I've done in this training session. We haven't broken it up into areas of learning because so many activities cover, a lot of activities cover more than one or two, sometimes even three areas, learning areas, learning and development areas. So that is why it's presented this way, so that you can see the full range. And in fact, just reading over them, you know, you could add different ones. I mean, this is whatever you spot. If you think that something is more, you know, there's some of these that could be, for example, the jigsaw puzzles. I was thinking before that could easily be an expressive art and design objective too. You could be meeting one of those objectives. So it's just showing you how different these games, which are usually sort of adult initiated, and then if children, you know, if once they get to grips with how they work, they can play these games on their own. But it's just showing you how even sort of all adult-led activities can meet lots of different objectives from the topic webs. Okay, so yeah, so you can just see how the typical games that you probably already play, how they're meeting all those objectives in the topic web. Okay, just by looking at the colours. So give you a few seconds to just take that in. Okay, and then we've got, so these are sort of games that also, you know, they're, like I mentioned, they tend to be adult led because they often come with instructions and, you know, rules and things like that that children need to understand. But then this is an example of how we can set up our continuous provision. Okay, so we are ensuring continuous provision and maximizing learning opportunities, coordinating possibly with the Spanish teacher. So it's actually about the environment, as I mentioned before. You know, in the Emilio Reggio approach, the environment is the third teacher. So you've got the adult, you've got other children, and that's the first teacher, second teacher, the other children, and the third teacher is actually the physical space. And so they all work together as the different ways that children learn through interacting with their environment, and that includes people and things. So the continuous provision is basically, this could be done, you know, if you don't have access to the space all the time, you know, you could just make sure that those things are there for whenever the children want to access, and that could mean coordinating with colleagues, okay, and making sure that, you know, these things are set up for if and when the children want to use them. And that's one way of kind of making sure that there is this sort of child-led play-based opportunities for learning. And, you know, if children are working on their own in these areas or with other children, you might be thinking, well, how do they learn language? Some of the things are, you know, like music, singing songs and things like that, experimenting with animal noises. They're language based anyway, but a lot of these things can be with your interactions with them as they're working. So talking to them about what they're doing, providing a running commentary, asking questions, and just playing, getting down on the children's level and playing with them. The great thing about the continuous provision ideas is that they can easily be adapted to different topics, and they can vary according to the different interests of the children. So if you know that your children really love dinosaurs and the topic is dinosaurs, and you can make sure that you have some sensory messy play activities related to dinosaurs, or some dinosaurs in the small world area and things like that. So it's just to show you the possibilities, what that actually means through planning continuous provision. You might do some of these, all of these, but it's important to just make sure you consider this area. It's moving away from that sort of teacher-led, worksheet-based, I'm coming in to teach you something for the 40 minutes that I see you, to making it a more holistic experience. Okay. Okay, so right. So moving on to, we've looked at examples from the worked example, how you can actually develop a topic web, develop a topic web looking at the learning objectives and develop those into concrete activities. So we'll just go back to, this is what we looked at last week. So we have the story. From the story, we get our topic or our theme, okay? And then we build in all of these different areas. And that could include things that they're doing in Spanish as well. You might be wondering, well, obviously it's not going to be the same story if, well, it could be the same story if there's a translation, but it could just mean the Spanish, working with your Spanish colleagues, that they come in on the theme, or that you share ideas on how best to work on a particular area, and then some of those activities will be done in Spanish and some in English. So it's kind of encouraging working together and being inclusive, having a joined up approach between colleagues, language assistants if you have them, and so or if you have teachers that come in to help, looking at ways to involve everybody in the topic that's generated from the story. Okay, so that's what we looked at last week, and then this is sort of looking at a different story. We've got our objectives for each of the areas of learning and development for the very hungry caterpillar, and then what we would do is we need to consider these things. Okay, so what to consider when planning. So what we need to do is consider the different areas of learning and their objectives. Just going back to the very hungry caterpillar, so we'd read through some of these. We think, what are our objectives here? Okay, for the different areas of learning. Okay, and then we go back here, back to this slide. We look at what sort of adult-led focus activities in circle time could we have? How can we generate activities and experiences for generating interest in the story, storytelling activities, general activities and learning opportunities, games, okay? And games in the sense of not free play, but games that have rules and that are developmentally appropriate, but games that that's why they're in the adult-led section. So when we talk about play-based activities, we're talking about something slightly different from games. Games are playful, but when we're talking about play-based, we're looking at the things that come in continuous provision, which are a little more child-led, okay, as opposed to adult-led. Okay, so and then we would consider. So we look at these types of things: the generating interest, the storytelling activities, other general activities. This is probably the biggest part, and then we sort of link them to the different areas of learning. And then we look at the continuous provision. So these are things that you need to consider when planning, based on the topic web. Okay, so it's not set in stone. Okay, it's about meeting the needs of the children that you have in your care, that you teach. It's also about linking the learning objectives to the activities and the learning opportunities you provide. So be clear about why you are doing the things that you do. Okay, we spoke a bit about that in the previous webinar. And I think for those of you who already work in this way, hopefully this session has been a chance for you to revisit and confirm all the things that you're doing right. Maybe even to reflect on your practice and think about things that you could change or enhance or tweak based on what you've seen today, or just to continue on doing the way you've been doing. And hopefully, you know, for those of you who aren't used to working in this way, it's giving you a bit of confidence in the approach. So yeah, I mean, I think basically we could move over to some questions now. I think, Mark, if you have any questions that have come in, we can, maybe this is the time to answer them. So
thanks very much, Tracy. Catherine, yeah, I was going to say, go turn your camera on. Thanks. Thanks very much, Tracy, for running through that. I mean, you know, it's very important, especially for the teachers who are with us, who are in the program, that, you know, you've got an insight into some of the work that's been going on, some of the things that we're doing, and you can see where the work is going and how we are linking everything to the objectives. And that's obviously the most important thing. Tracey, I don't know, with this view, can you actually see us for a question? Have you got us in view, or do you want to say?
I can. Yeah, I can. I'm not sure what you can see on your screen now. Can you still see my slide? No.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter as long as you can see us. We can see your slides. Yeah. Okay. So we have got some questions coming in, and I think the first one I'd like to ask you, because it came just now, and I thought it was quite interesting. That, you know, well, so the teacher didn't have a name. The teacher said she loves the way of teaching and learning, but how do you explain the instructions and what they have to do in class in English, or do you use Spanish? I don't know, whichever one of you wants to start. Catherine, do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, obviously in our school we don't use Spanish for things like instructions. We would maybe use Spanish if it was an emergency situation, something like that. So how do we build it up when the children come with no English, which they do? They start with 0 English. So we would daily routines. So the children get to know that after a certain, like a carpet session or a circle time, that then they're free to go and do some things. And I've seen in classes where teachers have little like squares with the activities on, and so that they can say, if you want to play in this area, so it might have construction on it. So actually children who don't maybe understand the instructions, they'll realize, oh yes, that area is the arts area. And sometimes the teachers say, you know, if you'd like to play in this area, and you can see the art, that's over there. If you'd like to go and build something, that's over there. There's free play on the floor. So I've seen that approach as well. Apart from that, it's daily practice of routines, really building up very short commands and short sentences for the very small children. And also, if you've got, like Tracey's been explaining, continuous provision, there's actually not a right and wrong way of the children doing activities. So you can just watch the children and see actually what they do with the materials you set up. So actually it's not right and wrong. They may make a mask. They may just scribble on a piece of paper, which you sometimes see. So actually from not even telling them what to do in this continuous provision and allowing the children to do what they want to do, you could sometimes step back a little bit and just see what they actually make with those activities, with those resources.
Yeah.
I don't know that.
Definitely. No, that's covered a whole lot, Catherine. I think the same. I think building up gradually, and you know, using lots of gesture and mime and using visuals. That's why I think the play-based activities are so important, because they're hands-on, and so children are learning by doing. I mean, I've had cases where I translate. If I speak to the children in Spanish, doesn't mean they're going to understand me. The children are sometimes getting to grips with the concept of what to do at school. So If you have clear if you have clear routines and the children gradually know what to expect, I think that's the best way to start building up the language. And be patient, because it takes time. You know, they won't get it straight away. So I think just be persistent. And I think as well with that age group, it's a bit of a missed opportunity to translate and speak in Spanish, because like I said, it doesn't necessarily help them. They might actually be confused if you start speaking to them in Spanish. It's sometimes easier for you to just carry on in one language. So, yeah.
No, thanks, Robert. I mean, even when you're working with teachers, I mean, you know, it doesn't matter what instructions you give, you have to show people what to do at the best of times. So, yeah, especially the case at early years. Okay, we've got another question which is maybe connected to that. Oh, sorry, that question was from Noelia. Thank you, Noelia. Another question now which says, how can we do some of these how can we do some of these child-initiated activities when we don't have any support in our classroom? So I suppose in a situation where you don't have an assistant of any sort, it's just the teacher in the classroom. Tracey?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a reality, isn't it, that we tend to have quite a lot of children in the classroom and we don't always have help. I think the best way to sort of deal with that is to look at your situation, coordinate with your colleagues, think about the best way that you could provide that, looking at what the space provides as well. Sometimes breaking the learning up into sort of smaller learning stations. So Catherine, you might have more to sort of add in that respect, but sort of having small group work, so children can work independently at maybe rolling plasticine or drawing a picture, things that are quite easy to set up that then you sort of go around and just need to monitor. I think if you've got things, I think that's why it's continuous provision, that it can, as you mentioned before, Catherine, about it being child-led, they're not instruction heavy type of activities, and so children can sort of go independently to that area and do stuff, and you comment or ask questions or help them. It's those small interactions with saying please and thank you, and do you want a blue pen or a white piece of plasticine. That's where that rich language exposure comes through, and it's really natural and authentic. So I'd say that, like, it might feel that you're not speaking much to each child, but it's quality rather than quantity. So yeah, I don't know if you've got anything to add, Catherine.
I'd probably say it could be, it could be daunting to sort of think, well, I've got 25 in the class. I mean, less so now with COVID, but gosh, I'm by myself and the children are just going to be all over the place. Would it be better to have them more controlled? And I was controlling what they're doing. Actually, they're perhaps not learning when you're telling them what you want them to do. It's your point of view. So if you probably more going into the organisation, maybe less is more. If you've got a certain type of class that if you set up 10 activities, they're going to be going mad. 3 or 4 well-resourced, engaging. So if there's loads of things for them to do in that corner, you could have 6 or 7 children there very happily occupied and sort of out of your head a little bit, and you can go over and see how they're doing. I think it's like Tracey said, look at everybody's classes are different. You'll have some children who you just know are going to flit around from activity to activity. You have some where there's a group that they're going to love a sort of activity and they'll sit there for a long time. Knowing your learners, what we talked about last week, know them well, find what they're really interested in and try. It is a lot of work in terms of planning the third teacher, the environment, to make sure that it's occupied.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Thanks. And yeah, as you say, it ties into this knowing your learner, knowing the children you've got in front of you, doesn't it? And also to the point you made earlier, Tracey, about they've got to do things for themselves and make mistakes for themselves. Otherwise, a lot of their learning isn't actually going to happen, is it? So there's another question which also connects a little bit with last week. In fact, I think we may have answered it, but it's worth answering again because it's come up again. Is we've only got a limited amount of time a week. How do we do all of these things? How do we approach all of the opportunities that the topic web provides? Which of you wants to answer that, or both?
Catherine, you go first.
Yeah, I can start. For those of you who were here last week, I said, you get your topic web, or you create your own topic web from a book, and you might have 25 objectives. So don't do all the objectives for a start. You'd have to think, well, I've got 6 hours of time with this class, so think about the objectives that are most meaningful once again for your class and most at the correct level. But remembering that perhaps when you're doing an English, it crosses over with an art activity like Tracey had in her box before, where by doing something you can be covering 3 or 4 different objectives. So don't get sort of, oh, there's so many things to do and I'm not going to have time. Pick and choose the ones that you think children are going to get the most out of, and you'll probably find, actually, if you're planning really the environment and setting up well, you're going to cover 5 or 6 or 7 objectives with the activities.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's what the topic web approach is trying to do, isn't it? Sort of be efficient with the links that there are between, you know, the different areas of learning, and understanding that children do learn many things at once. And so, you know, it's not about having a whole load of separate activities. It's about achieving quite a few objectives with just the one activity too. So, yeah.
And I think that's crucial. I mean, I think, you know, the other thing that the topic webs are aimed at, certainly in terms of working within our project, is that, as you said, you can choose your objectives, but there always are higher objectives. It's not just an activity for activity's sake.
Yes.
So yes, do pick and choose. You know, that's the point. You know, but there is always, you're always working to one of the objectives which is set out in your overall objectives, which are the learning objectives, which are age related, content related, etc., etc. So I mean, I think, you know, it's very, very important. Brilliant. We've got a couple of questions which refer more specifically to text at the moment. I mean, well, this is text and how we use them. Should children be learning sentences or even the book by heart? What do you think, Tracey?
Yep.
No, I mean,
Catherine.
yeah, Catherine was going to speak about Talk for Writing, I think, a bit. Some of the, because
it's interesting. Somebody, that somebody's asked that question. It ties in nicely with something. I mean, obviously, first of all, you wouldn't really have children learning big books off by heart. You might have them learning, depending on the level again, you know, so you're using the gingerbread man, run as fast as you can, you can't catch me on the gingerbread man. They naturally pick up those rhythms and those sort of choruses. I mean, we use, and you can look it up, Pi Corbett's Talk for Writing, where children do learn chunks of text off by heart and say it with actions and using a story map to keep them in check. And as it says, Talk for Writing, they talk a story and be able to write it down. So if you look, if you just look up Pi Corbett's Talk for Writing, he's got good resources on the website. And you know, by all means, learn. I wouldn't say learn a whole book off by heart, because that's even boring, isn't it, as well? So it's the bits that you like, or let's join in with the chorus, or what does the mum say, or what does. So children love doing that anyway, don't they? It's not something, you know, that you have to generally force. They naturally want to join in with the fun bits of a story. So yeah, I think it's something that if they're motivated and they like doing it, then definitely.
And we've got another question, which might be the last one, but a question here which is quite I don't know if you can or whether we can, but what books, it says should, but I don't know if it could be could, what books should we be using, or what books would you recommend? Do you have any sources or ideas for books we might recommend, or books that you use?
I think once again, I mean, you know, all books offer a wide, like we said last week, a wide, you know, learning experience. Use the books, once again, I keep repeating it, that your children are interested in. Don't, you know, if you find that they're not listening and they're bored, change books. Don't just carry on. There's plenty of books to choose from, depending on your school, once again, and the resources available. Use the books you have. Now there's lots of online stories as well that you can use, and those of you who've been online teaching, as we have in school, the teachers had to scrabble together during the first lockdown, where they didn't have their books in the house, online books and sharing things like that. So I'll dismiss that idea. Yeah, just follow children's interests. I think we're going to put in the toolkit. I'm not sure whether there's going to be some a list of books that perhaps tried and tested, fun.
Yeah, I think. I mean, I think. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, Tracey, that you might just want to add into this, because there's a follow-up question which says, which is you've sort of touched on, Catherine, which is, how do you feel about reading books from the internet? Advantage, disadvantage. I don't know if that comes into, you can put that into your answer, Catherine. Sorry, Tracey. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think we have the advantage of having so many stories at our fingertips now on the internet. So why not use it? I'd kind of point out the benefits of reading a big book, a physical big book, because you are doing things like eye contact, gestures, or even telling a story. Sometimes you use the pictures as prompts, but you can sometimes, once they know the story, can start telling the story without the actual book, which is a bit like what Talk for Writing does, isn't it? It gets you to become storytellers. So I think there's advantages and disadvantages to both, but I'd be careful about sort of over relying on the internet, because it doesn't have that human connection. But it's definitely a brilliant tool, and you know, we should be making use of them, of the stories that are available. There's lots of good stories that have been turned into songs as well, which I love. And they're always catchy and great for the children to follow along with. So don't know if you've got anything to add to that.
And of course, there's also always moments of the day when you're working with small children that you think, I'm just going to put the story on the screen, if you've got a white. Because everybody knows getting ready for lunch with 20 odd children, waiting for them to watch. So there's moments as well, and if it's in English, better.
Definitely.
Well, thank you very much for that. I think that's, unless somebody's going to put another question up at the moment, that's the last question I've got. So maybe we'll just move on. I'm looking at the time. Perhaps we'll just move to finishing off. Do you want to just put up the next slide, Tracey? Just
is that there now? Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to make it full? That's it. Got it. Exactly. So I'll just move my text from in front of it. Okay. So for those of you who are in the programme, just so you know, this is an idea of what is going to be included in the toolkit, which we're hopefully going to get to the Ministry for Publication this month. February is the aim, and so ideally, you know, we'll be putting this out to schools either before the end of this academic year or certainly for the beginning of the next one, depending on how long that process takes. So there'll obviously be an introduction. There'll be something about the approach, which is behind all of this. There'll be something about inclusive practices, which again should underlie everything that we're doing. There will be a sample core book list, so an idea of some of the books that we use, some of the books that have come from the, remember that the working group includes a majority of teachers from the programme, so there'll be books that teachers use in their schools, apart from the ones that we do. There'll be 10 model topic webs. Remember, again, these are planning tools. I mean, obviously, feel free to use them, but the idea, these are prompts for doing your own and doing others. There'll be one worked example, which, again, you've seen a little bit of today from Tracey, so where we'll work it through from objectives into activities to give you an idea of how that might work. Some guidance to phonics and some guidance around assessment in early years. So that is what we're putting together with the support of the working group, and then the few things that we're adding around that. And that will be the toolkit for early years at this stage. I mean, luckily in the digital world we live in, it's a dynamic toolkit, and we can add, change, etc. Over time, but that's the starting point. And then I think the next slide is just say thank you, isn't it? Yes. So again, I'd like to say thank you, especially to Tracey and to Catherine for presenting the work of the working group and presenting all of the things we've done, and to giving you an idea of how this is going to work, or how we hope it's going to work. Obviously, we'd love to hear from you too, both at this stage and then later on when the toolkit is out there, because as I said, it is dynamic and there are things that we can do with it. But I especially, again, want to thank the people who've contributed. Apart from Tracey and Catherine, you can see the names there of the early years working group and the team from the British Council School. And it has been very much a collaborative effort. And we will be doing more. Obviously, we intend to do more training around the toolkit as well. I mean, it's not just a question of pushing it out there. We hope to be able to do some training in the short term as well as the medium and long term as well. And then just to remind you, some of you have been asking, there are webinars. The next 2 webinars will be on the same sort of idea, what we've been doing in the primary working groups, and they will be on the 10th and 17th of February. So again, I think there are some teachers who probably teach early years and lower primary, so you might find those useful as well. And you're very welcome to come whether you're in the programme or not. The information will be sent out shortly and the links, but keep those dates, same time, same place, more or less. 10th of February, 17th of February, the webinars for primary. Thanks again to everybody for coming. Thanks again to Tracey, Catherine, behind the scenes, to Maureen and to Anne. And thanks to all of you for coming, joining us and staying with us. Hope it's been useful. As I say, especially if you're in the programme, we'd love to hear from you how useful it's been and what you think. And we'll be in touch. Stay safe, everyone, and keep well.
Bye.